Hi and welcome. Today we're sewing the Neo top together. It's much easier than it looks. It's a beautiful piece for summer that you can wear elegant or casual, and it works well in so many different fabrics. So before you start, print out the pattern and make sure to print the first page and measure the test square to confirm it's the right size. So after we connected everything, we cut out the pattern pieces and then we place our fabric on fold and make sure that the pattern lays parallel to the selvage and in the grain line direction. You can see that only the center front is on fold and not the neckline, so we need a little gap there. We need this pattern piece 2 times, so I'm taking it again and place it on fold again and cut everything out. Then the back piece we need 4 times actually, and also parallel to the grain line. That's all our pattern pieces here. Now I'm using this tool to make little holes at the dart points, so I can push through needles later on. I'm also making little notches on the side seams where the dart ends. And yeah, this method is very precise. You can also use a marker and do it another way, but for me this is very precise and easy. So I carefully push all the needles through the paper and remove the pattern. And now I flip it over and do the same again. At the same spot I push through more needles and open it again and do the same. Yeah, this just makes sure that all our darts are on the same spot and it's very parallel, everything. Now I mark all the dots and connect them. Make sure that this is on the left side of your fabric. To keep the edges from stretching out, we add a line of straight stitching within the seam allowance, about a presser foot's width from the edge. This stabilizes curved or diagonal areas and prevents distortion over time. We use a 2mm stitch length and sew from the shoulder toward the center or from the side toward the center, making sure to stay within the seam allowance. And here you can clearly see the difference between an edge that's been stabilized and one that hasn't. We'll do this on both front pieces along the neckline and armhole edges. Next, sew the darts. The top has side bust darts and waist darts that end right at the waistline. For the side dart, start at the side seam, fold the dart so that the lines match exactly. Backstitch at the side and stitch towards the tip. At the tip, don't backstitch, just leave long threads and tie a knot. You can also use a needle for that, that's easier, and this gives a clean finish. Do the same for the waist darts, and in total we have 8 darts. And after sewing these, press the side bust darts down and the waist darts towards the side seams, and press from both sides. For the ties, fold each piece in half lengthwise, then fold both long edges toward the center and fold in half again, so it's about 1 centimeter wide. At one end, fold in 1 centimeter and press down. To reduce bulk, snip a small diagonal cut at the corners so it folds in neatly and gives a clean finish. Then stitch along the open edge, very close to the edge, backstitching at the beginning and at the end. For the back ties, fold it in half lengthwise, right sides together, and sew along the long edge with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Do that for both pieces. And then we use a safety pin or a loop turner to turn it right side out. Once it's turned out, press it flat, and at one end, use your fingers to push the raw edge in by about 1 centimeter and press it flat. This gives a nice and clean finish. Finally, I top stitch all the way around, very close to the edge, so it looks nice and lies flat. Now it's time to attach the back pieces to the front. Make sure you're using the correct side seam of the back piece, not the other curved edge, so you don't attach the wrong side. Sew the side seams with a 1 cm seam allowance and do this for both front pieces. After sewing, press the side seams outward away from the center of the garment, both from the front and the back. Next, attach the ties to the neckline. Use the raw ends of the two thin ties and place them right where the notches are. Pin them in place and secure them with a quick line of stitching within the seam allowance so they don't shift later. Then place both pieces right sides together, aligning the neckline edges. Pin everything well and sew the neckline with a 1 cm seam allowance. This way the ties are secured between the layers and the neckline has a clean finished edge when turned right side out. Now cut small snips into the seam allowance along the curves. This will help the neckline and armhole edges lay nice and flat when turned right side out, but be very careful not to cut through the seam, so don't go super close to the seam. I also trim down the seam allowance a little bit. Then I mark 5 centimeters from the top of both sides. Starting from this mark, I stitch along the armhole edge down to the end of the back piece on both sides. We're leaving this gap at the top so we can join the back seam later. Now we're going to take the back ties and place the unfinished end between the both pieces and sandwich them in between on each side. Make sure it's not twisted and push it a little bit in between so you don't accidentally sew over it. And pin everything in place, make sure that everything aligns neatly. And first we're gonna sew the right seam here, the small one. And then when we sew the curve, make sure not to accidentally sew the strap in between, so go very slowly and push it a little bit away. When you get to the side seam, you can leave the needle down in the fabric, lift the presser foot and pivot your work slightly. This way it's easier to follow the curve and then continue sewing straight down the side seam. After that, it's a good idea to double check and make sure your stitching is smooth. You gently pull on the back tie and check that everything is laying properly. If needed, open a few stitches and adjust the fabric so it lies nice and flat before finishing. Next, clip small notches again into all the curved edges and trim back the seam allowance a little bit. We're almost finished. So now what we have to do, we will close the hemline already a little bit. And now is also a good time to double check the length that you desire. If you like it a little bit shorter, you can just use a bigger seam allowance here and mark it at the hemline. We start sewing on one of the sides and mark an opening of about 15 centimeters in the middle. Make sure to backstitch. And now to the fun part, turn everything right side out. So you take your hand and just pull everything. This can take a while, especially at the straps. So you gently use your fingers to pull everything out, and then we give everything a good press. Take your time for this because this really makes the difference in how your garment will look later on. Also use your fingers to push any corners in place. While pressing, make sure to shape the opening so that the seam allowance is aligned and folded in neatly. This way, when you top stitch it later, it will be nice and straight and you can close the opening in one go. At the corners, you can also trim the seam allowance diagonally so the corners turn out sharp and crisp. Press everything well. Next, we're going to attach the straps. Lay them on top of each other, making sure they aren't twisted, and align the center seams on both straps. Pin or clip them together, then stitch across with a 1 cm seam allowance. I also like to trim down the seam allowance a little bit so it lays more flat. Press the opening flat so it aligns with the seam. For the top stitching, you can do just the neckline area or go all the way from the back piece around the neckline to the other side of the back piece. It's up to you. This step gives a nice finish and adds stability. Finally, we finished the hem. So we fold the edge in, press it, and top stitch it straight across about a presser foot width from the edge. This will give your top a clean and professional finish. But before you do this, double check that everything is sitting well and make any adjustment if needed. So that's it. This is the finished top. I really hope I explained everything clearly and that you were able to follow along well. Otherwise, please let me know. I'm always happy to answer and help you. I'm so happy if you now have your own beautiful summer top, and I can't wait to see all the different versions you make. So please feel free to leave a comment or feedback. It was my very first YouTube video, so it's not perfect yet. Please tag me or send me photos of your garments. It always makes my day to see my designs come to life all around the world. And yeah, thank you so much for sewing along with me.